Good morning and welcome to the Monday Call, brought to you by NZ Funds. I'm Stefan Clark, Chief Client Officer at the firm. New Zealand has long been a pioneer in the financial technology fintech sector, embracing innovations like EFTPOS and ATMs. The success of companies like Xero and PushPay inspired founders across the country, proving that Kiwis can build local fintech businesses that thrive internationally. A decade ago, fintech was New Zealand's fifth largest tech subsector, generating a modest 161 million in revenue. Today, it's rocketed to 2.6 billion with an ever-growing list of ambitious entrepreneurs forging ahead. This morning, we're joined by Greg Shanahan, Managing Director of the Technology Investment Network, also known as TIN, to discuss the evolution, history, and future of fintech and technology more generally in New Zealand, and TIN's newly published Fintech Report 2024. We will discuss the role the tech sector plays in our economy, why fintech has grown faster than other subsectors, how our technology compares with other countries, and what emerging themes TIN sees. Greg, thank you so much for joining us. It's a delight to have you here. Look, I thought we would kick off by how you got involved with TIN, or it was started, and your journey in that organisation.
Oh, thanks. Thanks for having me, Stefan. It's a pleasure to be here. Yes, so TIN is a 25-year-old organisation, so we partied like it was 1999, and set up really to curate the growth of the tech sector. Originally, its origin was a major event at the time of the America's Cup defence in 2000. And we've been publishing the TIN report now for 20 years. So this year is our 20th report.
It's a big achievement.
Thank you. Yeah, it's a long time.
And so when it was originally set up, what was the thinking? We can see that there's an emerging technology sector and we want to support it, or was there a need that you felt wasn't being served?
I think for any Kiwi that's been overseas, and when you come back, often you come back because your parents are getting older, but you don't want to come back to retire. And so I think we've got a unique culture, and I had a desire that we should be masters of our own destiny. So the opportunity for tech is the opportunity to diversify our exports into high growth areas and to an area that was almost infinitely scalable, so it could have a profound effect on the economy. And so from that, you get two things. One is economic sovereignty, and that comes with political sovereignty. And that drips down or goes down to essentially social and economic equity within the country. So I genuinely believe that New Zealand's got a shot at utopia, and the advantage of being remote and small is an advantage, and not a disadvantage.
Okay, well, we'll come back to that location piece in a second, but how does TIN engage with the sector, and as an organisation, how's it set up?
Yeah, so I didn't really know anyone in the technology sector or much to do with the ecosystem that existed back then. There were some companies around, but not a whole lot. People like Navman or Tate Electronics or the Fisher and Paykells. But one of the things that struck me, I'd come back from the United States, and the dot-com boom was on fire at the start of 2000, and nothing seemed to be happening here. So we had a seminal event where we had a lot of captains of industry from Silicon Valley. I just went round and found as many people as I could in the phone book and went and had coffee with them, and tried to impress on them, our mission. So we started these sort of personal relationships that have continued over time and expanded, which is fantastic. And I think that's one of the superpowers in New Zealand, that everybody knows everyone. So things like disseminating best practice or new technology or any of those things can be spread across the ecosystem more easily and more quickly. But even with that, I found that there wasn't really a deep understanding of what was going on and even to quantify what was happening. So decided that we need to make tech a thing and use some objective data. So we started surveying companies. So that first report was in 2005. I went down to the Devonport post office, as you did, and sent out about 70 surveys. Got responses from probably about half a dozen to 10 companies. Reported on 50. Last year, we surveyed 1,200 companies electronically, and we report on 300 in the report. So things have changed considerably.
Okay, so I guess if you sort of cast your mind back 20 years ago, in the journey from then to now, were there any major catalysts that accelerated its growth, or has it been more that we just keep eking out new businesses and new entrepreneurs come to our shores, or are sort of bred by Kiwis? What's driven that big shift?
The good thing about New Zealand is always fostered people with broad thinking and open minds, people like, say, Bill Hamilton or Bill Gallagher or Richard Pearce, Ernest Rutherford, those types. Probably the single biggest thing in that 20 years has been just the growth of the power of the internet and the revolution that has created. And then more recently, the growth in the power of computing and previously called machine learning, but now AI, is really distributing and reducing the cost of a whole lot of technologies and leveling the playing field. So can't help but ignore that opportunity. From the New Zealand Inc. point of view, probably undoubtedly the growth of Xero over that period of time and its ability to scale and raise funding was a seminal event. The maturity of the growth of Fisher and Paykel Healthcare more recently, particularly around COVID, and then probably another milestone in terms of the emergence of a space industry in New Zealand, and all of those things 30 years ago people would have thought was outside our capability and remit. So that's inspired other people to try and do similar things.
And when you mentioned earlier this idea of the contribution it makes to New Zealand, how do you think about, can you expand on how you think about that contribution? Obviously there's a tension on the one hand about bringing talent into New Zealand from abroad and then investing in local people. There's a tension there about foreign capital, local capital. And then there's a tension, Kiwis can do attitude, but we also we struggle when Xero goes overseas, for example, and lists on the ASX. So how do you think about the contribution that the technology sector makes to New Zealand and managing of those different dimensions?
I've thought about this question deeply before this interview, and more recently, we have a network. We have members now who help pay for the organisation and dinners. And the other night we had about 40 CEOs, many of them from the large companies. And when you're doing a presentation, you've always got some old guy at the room saying, "Oh yeah, it's all great, but how's it really going?" So tech has become the second largest source of offshore income for New Zealand after dairy. The 200 largest tech businesses have export revenue of over 13 billion. Their revenues are 17 billion. That revenue has been growing roughly about 10 to 12% per annum for the past 5 years. If you looked at the number of companies with revenues over 200 million, that has quadrupled in 10 years. It's gone from 4 to 16. This year it'll probably be somewhere between 18 to 20. So, the 30,000 people working in New Zealand with an average income of around about $100,000 per year it's a pretty significant impact. And I think that why I was keen to talk to you today and talk to the people that listen to you is I don't think enough Kiwis really understand that.
Yeah, it's huge, isn't it? And then fintech is obviously part of that. First off, I guess fintech, just if you wouldn't mind trying to describe where it starts and stops, and then how it fits in amongst the other subsectors.
And so fintech is primarily around things that involve commerce or financial transactions and related industries. Things like payment solutions, accounting services, accreditation, insurtech. So pretty much commercial applications and typically accessed over the internet. And one of the revolutions of Xero in terms of wanting to revolutionize accounting for small businesses, so transform the sophistication of small businesses through online accounting services, and do that internationally was kind of a groundbreaker that a New Zealand company could be ballsy enough to try and do that. And so they went out and were successful, as we all know, in raising a lot of money. And so I guess what does that say about New Zealand? What it says, I think, if you look at the two largest sectors, fintech and health tech, they're pretty fundamental in Maslow's hierarchy of needs. You've got the reciprocity of people have to transact between each other. People want to be healthy and well too. So they're pretty fundamental. And both of those markets, the two fastest growing and the two largest markets, are being massively disrupted by technology. So it's created an opportunity for people to bring in an infinite variety of solutions to do that. So with fintech, you've got essentially the disintermediation of banks as banks being an institution, but also as a building. And there's similar things starting to happen in healthcare with disintermediation of hospitals and accessing more healthcare online. So massive markets, massive institutions, just changing the way that Western economies work, and New Zealanders have had a first mover advantage in many of those markets.
It's interesting. I'm just casting my mind back when Xero was in its infancy. TradeMe sort of paved the way ahead of it from as a tech business that quickly rose to become very successful. And I think at the time Fairfax purchased it eventually, but they haven't gone abroad in the same way that Xero has. And so they've, I guess, diversified the scope of what they provide and focused internally, whereas Xero's focused outside. How do you think Kiwi businesses are set up to export? Do we have the right formula for that? Do we have the right networks and the right outlook and, I guess, the right infrastructure? I can think of other countries that are very export orientated and yet still small.
Yeah, that's all of these questions. You could speak for hours on them. Look, I think that we undersell ourselves. The fact that the number of Kiwi companies or companies in our TIN report, the TIN companies with revenues of over 200 million has quadrupled, says that we're learning to scale pretty quickly, and there's a growing and expanding pool of people who know how to do that. So yeah, I think increasingly I kind of think of global domination. Why can't we be the number one in any major market? It's got nothing to do with the size of your economy. It's just got to do with your focus and courage and execution. And I think increasingly Kiwis are believing in that.
What's changing? Is it just the fact that there are some people who are sort of leading the charge and showing it can be done? Or is it something else?
Pretty much that, I think, and that spread more quickly because we all know each other, and so best practices spread. I think that we've got to acknowledge that we as Kiwis, and I'm not into too much chest thumping about the Kiwis are better than anyone else, but I think we're very direct as a society, very transparent. There's a bias for action. We're very much DIY, so there's an ingenuity there. And generally, we do really well at small teams. So it's a generalist approach rather than this is my job and you do that, which is the sort of fountainhead for sort of innovation and what many companies in Silicon Valley try to instill. So I think people are seeing the results of that. What probably is not happening enough is more Kiwis investing in these companies.
Yeah, okay. And are you seeing the pool of capital changing? Or have you seen it change over the last 20 years? Was it harder in the past to find capital, or was it easier because there weren't so many people involved in this?
I guess since in the past couple of years, it's got hard again with global markets. But yeah, certainly pools of capital are growing, and the sophistication in terms of investors and investors in investing, and the companies in terms of attracting money is growing as well. There's a lot of foreign capital coming into the country, but ultimately we don't want to be too reliant on foreign capital, because at the end of that, more often than not, it means an exit of that company, if not from just shareholding, but also from the country. And if you look at fintech outside of Xero, many of our fintech stars are now foreign owned.
Yeah, and some people will say that that's a bad thing, and other people say that that's actually a really good thing, because it might help them scale and they can often continue to have a presence here but get bigger. How do you think about the challenges that foreign ownership present?
I think there's kind of no one path to Jesus kind of thing. There's no one solution for everyone. But I think that we need to increase the size of our stable of large New Zealand domiciled countries, who, for them, whether or not they're owned internationally, preferably at least partially New Zealand owned, but New Zealand is their base. And one of the exciting things around that is we're seeing the growth of second generation companies who are now, there's been a transition from the founder, which is what our event the other night was about, to a second generation. So of course companies like F&P Healthcare, Orion Health, Gallagher's, Raycon, Buckley Systems, Xero, have all moved on from the original founder and are continuing to grow. So as time goes by, they'll continue to add value to their offering and get bigger.
And yet they're still very connected to New Zealand, of course.
Yes, exactly.
I guess there's two bits to this question, but when you think about that sort of founder to the next generation, is that something that you see happening more and more as in the next sort of forward-looking period? Or is it that it's just there's lots of founders who are wanting to hold on and build it?
I think that people are seeing it happen more and more in terms of ultimately, I think if the job of being a founder is so pressurized, you quickly become aware of when you've reached the end of the tar seal. And I think that's generally happened in quite a sophisticated way in terms of a lot of these companies. And there's a new energy, but with the founder still involved. So it's really heartening to see, because you think that really this has only been happening, I guess, at its earliest since deregulation in the 80s, but even more so since the GFC. So Xero was listed just before the start of this GFC, and the growth in companies with revenues over 200 million has happened since then. And the growth of the technology sector broadly with some of these new companies that I think has inspired some of the more traditional companies that have been around a while. So people's aspirations have risen.
Just in the Olympic context, I was thinking of passing the baton as you were talking, and the relay, but the next person that, they run the end of the 100 meters and they're exhausted, or 200 meters, and they pass it on to the next person, and off they go. And so when the entrepreneur, the original founder, passes the baton, do we? It often happens when there's some sort of financial transaction around it, right? Is that when you're seeing it across all the the tech companies you've been involved in, or is it more that the founder has decided, hey, I'm ready to pass on to new management, but I want to stay fully invested?
Actually, it seems more the latter. I mean, obviously, founders move on if someone's bought the company. But if you look at companies like Orion Health or Gallagher's or Barclays Systems or Fisher & Paykel Healthcare, I mean, it wasn't the founder, but Mike Daniel, for example, the original CEO, is still on the board. They generally have it seems more common for them to retain involvement as a director or sometimes in a technical role. So then the companies generally don't seem to lose the experience that's there.
Right. So they're more in a governance or advisory capacity.
Yeah.
When you look at the technology sector in New Zealand today, what are the parts of it that excite you the most? Where do you look back? You're looking at future Greg, looking back on yourself and thinking, wow, those are the ones that I should have probably invested in. Which sort of, and it doesn't have to be companies specifically, but are there parts of the sector that you think are just moving forward much faster than others?
Yeah, there are. I mean, I spend most of my time. I've got my own company that I've started in the health tech space, and obviously that excites me. I mean, I think the democratization of access to healthcare is just the right thing to do, and I think we've got the opportunity to use new models to transform that. So that's exciting. I think that we can intersect technology with where your values are. It's great, but if you look at, say, fintech, it's still continuing to grow. Health tech, even appliances. So Fisher & Paykel Appliances has a motor plant in China for their smart drive motor. It's now it's owned by Hire, but it's making 13,000 motors a day. 13,000, wow, agritech, transport, agritech in terms of transforming the profitability and productivity of our farmland, transport, the whole thing around the space industry, and green tech. I mean, I think particularly in terms of our legacy, we've really got the opportunity to be an exemplar in terms of the application of green technology, and there's some really exciting companies in that space. So yeah, there's more than enough opportunity for young people in New Zealand to say, wow, that pushes my buttons.
Do you think the government should be more involved in supporting technology and orientating it? Because I guess, as a country, we could focus on those subsectors, for example, or we could diversify and focus on supporting other subsectors come through. How do you think, are we doing enough, and are we doing it in the right places?
That's a good question. I'm not sure that the political system fully understands the tech sector. And if you look at the companies that we've just been talking about, they're really at the bleeding edge of entrepreneurial spirit and risk. So high risk and money is not something that typically sits well within the political spectrum. If you'd asked anyone in the sector what could the government do, the answer would probably be, yes, give me more money. probably from an ecosystem point of view, I think some of the things that the government do is New Zealand's got to be a place where talent wants to live and wants to reside. And if we lose that quality of life, there's Australia's just across the ditch, and so we've got to keep talent here is one of the key things. And if it's not here, make it easy to get talent. And certainly we've got to support the funding, particularly in the early stages of the company's development. New Zealand is typically gun shy. They're not generally comfortable with something that's an analog risk where I could lose all my dough. So there's a gap there that needs support if we're going to continue to do these things.
Yeah, and I guess that's that foreign funding question comes if Kiwis aren't willing to put their money where their mouth is in this space, then but there are founders who want to pursue it. What are their options at that point?
Absolutely. So you just say, okay, all of that benefit, all the return on investment, all of the wages, all of the tax dollars, all the PAYE is potentially not going to be in New Zealand. That seems a pity because there are plenty of examples of companies that are making that kind of contribution. So the return on investment should be quite transparent.
When you talk about talent, talent obviously can come from sort of two sources, and we mentioned this earlier. This idea of breeding it yourself and bringing people through universities locally, and feeding the ecosystem that way, or it's attracting talent from abroad. What have we got? Have we not got the settings right to bring enough people in from either of those groups, or through, I should say?
Yeah, look, I think for specialised talent, it should be easy to get people in and to minimise those roadblocks that are key. I think the thing that excites me about the increasing number of large companies is these are companies that have got the resources to invest in their own communities in terms of schools and academic institutions. So we can increase the representation of women and Māori Pacifica in these roles by the companies themselves. And this is a vision from Paul Callaghan, used to talk about this a lot, by becoming part of the community. And many of these companies are doing fantastic things in that regard, in terms of on-site training, involvement with local schools, scholarships for Māori and Pacifica, community funds. So they're all good sort of corporate and local citizens. So yeah, I think that coming back to what we said at the start about social equity, if we can make these jobs more appealing to people who are underrepresented, then you're solving a lot of problems.
Tell me a little bit about your mid-tech business that you're driving. How did you pursue that, and why did you pursue that, and what's sort of the pathway forward for it?
I really appreciate the opportunity to answer that question.
I'm sure you do.
So I co-founded an exciting medtech startup, and it's really inspired by Fisher & Paykel Healthcare to some degree in terms of the business model, which is 90% of their revenue is recurring. And this is a sweet spot for New Zealand companies. So if you can have cash flow because it's recurring revenue, so you're providing as a service, and at the same time have a plan that you increase the gross margin from that cash flow, you've got a path to riches. So the point of the market that we've developed a solution that uses AI, lasers, analyzed with lasers and cloud computing to verify intravenous drugs. So the delivery of intravenous drugs is inherently quite risky. A drug, once it's injected, goes to the body in 23 seconds. So if you screw up, consequences are severe. And that happens quite frequently. So roughly about 10% of administrations are in error in some ways. About 3% of patients So our business model is to verify every drug as it's administered in a proprietary syringe or an IV bag um, or IV line, and that's a big market. So in the US, about 40 doses are administered every second to hospital patients. So it's very similar to a fintech that we're adding value to that transaction and clipping the ticket as the drug is delivered by providing better governance and safety. And then through the cloud, we make hospital level services. So our focus is on cancer drugs, make those accessible outside of the hospital. So that anyone in a remote area or in a community has got the same level of safety and chance of success as they would in the hospital. And where we are at the moment, we've got working technology. So we're currently working with some of the largest healthcare providers in Australia, and we hope to, within the next few weeks, to have our first commercial supply agreement. So it's very cool, and we're just so fortunate that a lot of these large customers have come to us, and the saving that they get from using our system is significant. So yeah, it's trying to walk the talk from my perspective, but it's a long journey, but it's a very technically nuanced solution in terms of many problems to solve, which we've been fortunate in doing. So our goal is to be bigger than Fisher and Paykel healthcare, and a much bigger market, more commonly used.
Wow, it's an ambitious undertaking. How did you decide that was the path to go down? Where did the idea come from, and did it evolve, or was it a light bulb moment? And this is what we're doing.
So originally the idea started. I was approached by an inventor who had an idea around using light to look at. Initially, we looked at drugs, but then at blood, and then focused on drugs because it was a simpler problem to solve. And then saying, well, from a Kiwi point of view, New Zealand, Colin Murdoch invented the disposable syringe. If we took that back and we owned that market, that's a very big global market, and a really, really big company. So we've got data scientists, electronics engineers, pharmacists, it's a whole range of people. So skills well beyond my remit, but it was really the size of that opportunity and the potential to do good. So a lot like fintech is that we're giving hospital level care anywhere and making, starting with cancer drugs, those drugs accessible in places currently they're not.
It must have been an interesting transition running TIN and engaging with all these technology companies throughout New Zealand, to then saying, hang on, I'm going to be building this thing. How did you, was that a big shift for you personally, or is it just a reflection of an ongoing sort of development?
It's probably a reflection of mental instability and craziness on big two things at once. So I'm less involved with TIN and more involved with Verify, our company. And we've got a smart bunch of people working in both. But the idea of actually doing it, creating a product and taking it to market, which was my background before TIN, really had an appeal. And I wanted to have the opportunity to create something that was substantial and coming back to succession, last beyond me being around.
Fantastic, and creating a legacy of sorts. Being a New Zealand business, and we've touched on this in a sense, but being a New Zealand business at the bottom of the world, but having eyes on the world, tell me how you think founders should reflect on that. How relevant, irrelevant, important is our location as an export provider? And then for you personally, in the pursuit of building Verify, what does it mean?
I think it's is critically important. I mean, there's the disadvantages of distance, but politically, we're the least relevant country in the world, so it's a good thing. Not worth messing with. But I think New Zealand has uh, a positive image in the world. Actually, and typically people don't really care. They don't really care where you're from. And doing business with Australia and with Australian companies, they treat us as if we were Australian. The issue of us being from New Zealand is not even discussed. They're just really concerned about whether or not we can solve their problem. And I think as a country, people, we're pretty direct and honest, and I think that comes through and surprises people. So again, I think we have this inherent kind of superpower that it's easier to sell when you've created trust. And New Zealanders have been traditionally trusting and trustworthy people. So no, there's certainly no disadvantage in coming from New Zealand, and it's a freer environment without any baggage. I found working in the US, where I've worked there for about 3 years, or doing business in Australia. It's generally it's never been a disadvantage.
Okay. Having observed lots of founders through the years in tech, fintech, now medtech and other spaces, what guidance would you, or observations would you make about what mindset they need to be successful? Have you seen themes come through from the ones that have, from those founders that have built the business they were dreaming of? Is that something you see, or is it more about the idea and just brute execution?
Oh, it's a long subject. I think the idea is just to start. Execution is everything. So you have to have this ultimate belief that you're going to be successful, and always put yourself in a position where it's really hard to back out. In terms of you've got to commit fully and execute as well as you can. I think as the business grows, you're always doing things not as good as you would have liked. You're always doing things for the first time. You're always never having enough resources, and you've got to be comfortable with that. I think people who beat themselves up, or suffer their own mistakes, obviously making a run for their own back. I think you need to be very forgiving of yourself and others. But yeah, I would say be bold. If I looked at a guy like Rod Drury, he was absolutely focused on them being a big company. And even as a startup, he said, I've always said we were going to be $1 billion company. So people need to, the successful founders that I've seen have been really singular in their focus around what they could achieve. And I think we have an advantage in New Zealand is that we're a fairly egalitarian company. So it's easier to get small multidisciplinary teams to work because the boundaries are more blurred, people are more generalists. And so to keep the team focused on what you need to do is also key. So I think, probably the thing that's lacked historically was self-belief, but that's changing as people can see others succeeding.
Only those who believe do.
Yeah.
So people say.
Yeah, Henry Ford said, if you think you can or you think you can't, you'll always be right.
Okay, well, Greg, I'm going to let you have the rest of your week back. Thank you so much for your time. It's been a great conversation, and it's exciting to see the technology sector grow. I will keep an eye on your business, and I look forward to seeing that become what you hope it will. And for all of our listeners, go have a look at the TIN website. There's a lot of really interesting material on there, and the report, which breaks down the fintech sector today, is a great read, covering, and you get a real sense of the depth of the companies that are on there at the moment.
And if people want to invest in exciting medtech startup,
get in touch.
Get in touch with me. Yeah.
Thank you, everyone. Look forward to speaking to you again next week.
Thanks, Stefan. Appreciate it.
New Zealand Funds Management Limited is the issuer of the NZ Funds Active Income Series, NZ Funds Active Inflation Series and NZ Funds Active Growth Series, together the NZ Funds Active Series, as well as the NZ Funds Kiwi Saver Scheme, the NZ Funds Managed Superannuation Service, NZ Funds Wealth Builder and NZ Funds Income Generator. For further information or to request a copy of the product disclosure statement for each of these, please contact NZ Funds or visit nzfunds.co.nz. This recording is provided for information purposes only. The information provided is not intended as a substitute for specific professional advice on investments, financial planning or any other matter. Past performance is not an indication of future returns.